Hello, everyone. So far, we keep changing the goalpost for the ceasefire. While most sources report that some type of Black Sea ceasefire has been agreed upon, obviously there are concerns about how it will be tracked and reinforced. And yes, Zelensky has a valid point, saying Russia is lying about the terms. Well, are their mouths open? Yeah. What I find interesting is that depending on how many sources you look at, you get separate pieces of what this deal actually is. And it's still, after all of that assembly, not clear. So, how is this beneficial to Ukraine? So, we're going to dig into this a little bit. For starters, Russia and Ukraine agreed to ensure safe passage for commercial shipping in the Black Sea and to stop military strikes. That means Russia will stop firing, hopefully, on the non-military vessels. Also, separate statements were released after meeting with either party separately. I still think it's ridiculous that the actual parties involved do not get to sit face to face. And check this out. Russia says some of the sanctions on banks, insurance, and food exporters must be lifted before ceasefire comes into force. So, until that happens, they consider themselves in the right to continue firing on whatever, including the commercial vessels coming in and out of Ukraine. I am surprised at the March 25th deadline that they put to enact the ceasefire, considering how many details are still unresolved. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of towing the line on Russia's part, because that's what they do in terms of what constitutes a commercial vessel. So far, intelligent people around the world who are observing this agree that this is not to Ukraine's advantage. As I mentioned yesterday, throughout all of this, despite severely curbed resources and some of the ports being bombed out of existence, like Mariupol, Ukraine had, for the most part, maintained its exports and its humanitarian obligations. I mentioned in the past that a lot of the grain that comes out of Ukrainian ports goes to third world countries, some of whom ironically support Russia. So, what is Ukraine not getting out of this? And it should. There's no protections for the ports. So, what Russia is basically saying is that they're not going to fire at the ships at sea if they're commercial vessels. But that doesn't mean that they're going to also stop pounding the ports. So, remember, in order to send a ship out, you have to dock it, load it, maintain it, refuel it. That is not covered by the ceasefire. Meanwhile, Russia is getting to restore its fertilizer and agricultural exports. lower maritime insurance costs, and enhance access to ports and payment systems. So where is the win for Ukraine? This gives you a nice summary. Since the start of the invasion 3 years ago, Russia has damaged or destroyed 385 port infrastructure facilities, destabilizing port operations. Odessa is getting pounded all the time. It's basically nonstop. So they're saying on average every 3 days. It depends on the week. We've had weeks when Odessa was basically barraged every single day. In addition, Russia has blocked the port of Mykolaiv, so that's not functional at this point. And again, that is not mentioned in the agreement. What about the energy infrastructure? Well, what about it? This is what we know right now. Russia has struck Ukraine's energy infrastructure 8 times since March 18th, since this whole conversation has begun. That is after Kremlin had claimed to have ordered a pause on energy infrastructure strikes. So that's bullshit. In addition, Moscow says that Zaporizhia nuclear power plant is a Russian facility and should stay under Russian control. What? Since when? I mean, other than the fact that they invaded it 3 years ago. Zaporizhia nuclear power plant is located on Ukrainian territory, was built by Ukrainians, retrofitted by Ukrainians after the Chernobyl incident to make it safer. Protected by Ukrainians, manned by Ukrainians. How is this a Russian facility, and why, in God's name, should it be under Russian control? No, they invaded it just like they invaded every fucking thing else in Ukraine. Case in point, Ukrainians are calling Steve Witkoff out on his statements about the referendums and his claims that Russian-speaking people in Ukraine want to live under Russian rule. It's bullshit, and I agree with them. Basically, what they're saying is Witkoff is grossly incompetent and not at all knowledgeable about the situation, so he should shut the fuck up. Those votes were held in Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions in September 2022. They were against both Ukrainian and Russian laws. They were only recognized by Russia and North Korea. Not exactly countries known for free democratic elections. These referendums, as I mentioned yesterday, were held at gunpoint. Voter intimidation was utilized, and soldiers, armed soldiers, were banging on doors, forcing people to vote. There was no freedom of speech. There were no independent observers. How exactly can you even acknowledge the results of such a sham? Witkoff is incompetent. I'm surprised that Ukrainian journalists have the courage to call him out on it, but American journalists do not.